Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something that might seem a bit technical, maybe under the radar.
Yeah, but it's definitely got high-level attention.
Absolutely. We're talking about copper imports, and specifically, a recent White House action.
That's right. Executive Order 1.220. It was issued back on February 25th, 2025.
And it's all about the national security side of things, isn't it? Our reliance on copper from other countries.
Exactly. The core issue is this growing dependence and the potential risks that come with it. Risks to security, economic stability.
Okay, national security and copper. I get that it might make some people pause. Like, it's just metal, right?
Well, yes and no. It's because it's such a fundamental material.
Stick with us here because we're going to unpack this. It's not just about basic wiring. We're talking defense systems, critical infrastructure.
And crucially, a lot of the emerging tech that's shaping the future, things, that are really relevant if you're thinking about clean energy, EVs.
Right. Electric vehicles, solar panels, wind turbines, advanced electronic stuff many of you listening are probably involved with or rely on.
And this order, it's broad. It looks at raw copper ore, concentrates, refined stuff.
Alloys, scrap metal, even derivative products. So the whole picture.
The whole picture.
Yes.
So our mission today is basically to figure out what this executive order means for copper, for the U.S., for the future.
Let's start with the why. Why is copper suddenly a critical material in the eyes of the government?
Well, it's always been important, but its criticality is becoming more pronounced. Its conductivity is obviously key.
Sure.
But beyond that, it's absolutely vital in defense. Think about military aircraft, vehicles, sophisticated weapons systems. They all rely heavily on copper components.
Okay, so the defense angle is clear, but it's bigger than that.
Much bigger. Our basic infrastructure, the power grid that keeps the lights on, the communication networks we use constantly.
Our phones, the internet.
Exactly. Even water systems. They all use a ton of copper. These aren't like abstract concepts. They're the foundations of daily life.
Yeah.
And future development.
And you mentioned the emerging tech aspect earlier. That seems really key here, especially for, our listeners.
Absolutely. The order specifically calls out clean energy tech, solar, wind. The electric vehicle market is booming, and EVs need a lot more copper than traditional cars.
Right, and all the advanced electronics powering everything.
All of it. Copper is just a fundamental ingredient.
So if it's that crucial, what's the specific worry? You mentioned dependence?
It boils down to these vulnerabilities in the copper supply chain, as the order puts it. We're just increasingly reliant on getting copper from outside the U.S.
And is there a particular point of concern there?
Yes. A major one highlighted in the order is the sheer concentration of global copper processing.
Processing meaning smelting and refining.
Exactly. Smelting and refining. The order points out that one single foreign producer now controls over more than 50% of the world's copper smelting capacity.
Wow, okay. Over half.
And owns 4 of the top 5 largest refining facilities globally.
That does sound like putting a lot of eggs in one basket. How does that translate into a national security threat?
Well, the concern is that this kind of dominance, especially when there's also, global overcapacity in production.
Meaning too much copper being produced overall.
Potentially, yes. That combination creates what the order calls a direct threat. It opens the door to potential market manipulation.
Like controlling prices or availability.
Both. Imagine if that dominant player decided to restrict supply, maybe for strategic leverage, or just drove prices way up or down destabilizingly. That impacts our economy, our defense readiness, everything.
Okay, so the U.S. response is basically, we need more control over our own supply. What's the official policy change?
The stated policy is pretty direct. Ensure a reliable, secure, and resilient domestic copper supply chain.
Makes sense.
And the order explicitly connects this import dependence to the need for action under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act.
Section 232. Remind us what that does. It sounds familiar, maybe from steel or aluminum discussions.
Exactly. Section 232 is a trade tool. It allows the president, after an investigation led by the Secretary of Commerce, to adjust imports if they're found to threaten national security. Think tariffs, quotas.
Got it. So this executive order basically kicks off that investigation for copper.
Precisely. It directs the Secretary of Commerce to launch a probe into the national security impact of copper imports.
And what are they looking for? Is it just about that one dominant producer?
That's a big part of it, but it's broader. They're guided by existing law, specifically 19 U.S.C. 1862, which always looks at domestic production for defense needs and the impact of foreign competition.
Okay.
But this order gets very specific about the factors for this copper investigation.
Like what? Give us the highlights.
Okay, first, they need to assess current and projected U.S. demand for copper across defense, energy, critical infrastructure.
So not just what we need now, but what we'll need for, say, the green energy transition or future military tech.
Exactly. Looking ahead is crucial. Then they have to look inward.
At our own production.
Yeah. Can U.S. domestic production, mining, smelting, refining, and importantly, recycling, actually meet that current and future demand? What's our real capacity?
That seems like a critical question. What else?
Naturally, they'll scrutinize the foreign supply chains. Where does our imported copper come from? Who are the major exporters? And what are the risks if we rely too much on just one or two countries? What if something disrupts supply from those places? Political instability, natural disasters.
There are lots of possibilities. What about the economics? Unfair competition.
Definitely on the list. The investigation will look hard at the impact of foreign government subsidies. Is state support elsewhere creating global overcapacity?
And hurting U.S. producers.
Potentially, yes. Are there unfair trade practices at play? They'll also assess the economic hit if copper prices are artificially low because of dumping or state-backed overproduction.
So is the playing field level? And if not, what's the damage?
That's a key part. But it also includes a more geopolitical angle.
Which is?
The potential for export restrictions by foreign nations. This is where that idea of weaponizing supply comes in.
Like a country deliberately cutting off copper exports to gain leverage.
That's the concern they need to evaluate. Could a dominant suppliers use refined copper supply as a political tool?
Oh, that's a sobering thought. So they identify all these risks. What about solutions?
They'll also look at the feasibility of increasing domestic copper mining, smelting, and refining capacity. Can we actually ramp up our own production?
Is that realistic, given environmental rules costs?
That's exactly what feasibility means they need to study. What are the barriers? What are the opportunities? It's complex.
And finally, I assume they look at trade tools.
Yes. The last point is assessing our current trade policies. Are they adequate? Or are measures like tariffs or quotas needed specifically to protect national security in the context of copper?
Wow, okay. That is a comprehensive investigation.
Yeah.
A true deep dive by Commerce.
It really is. They're supposed to cover all those bases.
And how long do they have to do all this work?
The order sets a deadline. The Secretary of Commerce needs to report back to the president within 270 days.
270 days from February 25th. So that puts around late November this year.
That's right, late November 2025. And during this time, they're not working in isolation. They have to consult with other key players, defense, interior, energy.
To get the full picture on defense needs, resources, energy implications.
Exactly. It's meant to be a coordinated effort.
And this final report in November, what does it need to contain?
A few key things. First, the core finding. Do copper imports actually threaten to impair national security? Yes or no?
Okay.
If the answer is yes, then it needs recommendations. How do we mitigate that threat? This is where things like tariffs, import quotas, maybe even export controls on our copper could come up, or incentives for domestic production.
So, concrete actions.
Right. And beyond just mitigating the immediate threat, it should also include broader policy recommendations. How do we strengthen the entire U.S. copper supply chain long term?
Thinking about things like new investments, making it easier to get permits for mines or refineries?
Precisely. Permitting reform is often mentioned in these contexts. And boosting recycling efforts, getting more copper back into the system domestically.
That seems really important too. Okay, so a potential roadmap for copper policy. Any fine print we should know about in the order?
There's some standard language, the general provisions section. It basically says the order doesn't override any existing legal authority of government departments.
Right.
And it clarifies that this order doesn't create any new legal rights that, say, a company or individual could sue to enforce. It's mainly an internal directive to the executive branch.
Got it. Standard stuff. Okay, let's try to synthesize this.
Yeah.
What are the main takeaways from this executive order, this deep dive?
Well, the biggest takeaway is that the U.S. government is formally saying our dependence on foreign copper could be a national security problem.
Especially because of that one dominant producer controlling so much processing.
That's a huge driver, yes. So point 2 is that a major, wide-ranging investigation is officially underway to figure out just how serious that problem is.
And point 3 is that this investigation is supposed to lead to concrete recommendations by the end of the year on what to do about it, how to build a more secure domestic supply.
Exactly. It signals a potential shift, a real focus on bringing more of this critical supply chain closer to home, or at least making it more resilient.
And, thinking about the implications,
Yeah.
this isn't just some abstract industrial policy. We talked about defense, but also clean energy, EVs, electronics.
Right.
These are sectors that are growing rapidly, shaping the economy, shaping, frankly, the future careers and lives of many people listening.
Yeah.
If you're working in renewable energy R&D or designing EVs or in advanced manufacturing,
Then the price and a reliable availability of copper is actually a pretty fundamental input for your work, whether you realize it day to day or not.
so this investigation and whatever comes out of it could have some very real long-term ripple effects through those industries.
Absolutely. It's about securing the materials needed for the 21st century economy and a national security structure.
Okay, so to leave our listeners with something to chew on, here's a final thought. We know copper is everywhere, in old tech and new. If the U.S. does make a significant move, tariffs, quotas, big domestic investment, how might that ripple outwards? What could the geopolitical consequences be, the economic ones?
Yeah, and maybe flipping that around, as we look ahead, how much can innovation help? Can new materials substitute for copper in some uses? Can we get much better at recycling the copper we already have? What role does that play in building that secure domestic supply for the next generation?
Lots to think about. That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for tuning in.